because I've done a bunch of different sports and I just pick up new things and learn them, right? And part of it is that beginner mind. But part of it is that once you learn how to learn, the second time is so much easier. The third time is so much, it doesn't matter if you're learning a new language, you're learning math, you're learning coding, which I did at age 50. Every time you learn something new, it's actually easier, and people overestimate how hard that next thing is going to be. It's a choice that we make. And so it starts with a beginner mind.
I think it's terribly important to insist on individual values.
Learning Culture Podcast.
Initiative, creation, all these things which we value. It's now possible to make organizations on a larger scale than was ever possible before.
Learning Culture Podcast.
Teach people to analyze the kind of things that are said to them.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Learning Culture Podcast. I am your host, Andrew Barry. This is a show about creating cultures of learning inside your company. And joining me for this week is Emmy Sobieski. As you heard in that little intro there, Emmy is a big believer in the beginner's mindset, which I am too. And our conversation, while I initially approached Emmy to talk about the abundance mindset, ended up becoming a lot about beginner's mind. And it's actually an interesting idea around how those are related. And we get into that in a lot of detail in this episode. Emmy has recently published a book called $100 Million Careers, the 5 fastest career paths to wealth beyond your wildest dreams. And it really chronicles Emmy's role in a number of very large hedge funds and other investment vehicles where she was responsible for managing portfolios of hundreds of millions of dollars, and how she has pulled some of the wisdom that she learned from working with some incredibly successful billionaires into practical ways, really, that you can follow to build a career of your choice. And choice is a big thing for Emmy, as you can tell from that introduction. We also get into how our thoughts become beliefs and our beliefs become actions. So we always have to question our thoughts. And she provides some practical ways to do that with this one test around carrying 4 opposite thoughts in your head, and another test around questioning negative thoughts. Ask yourself how they serve you. We also cover Emmy's story about a company that she invested in that had a really high stock price, but a record of actual sales that she couldn't find, and how trusting her gut and sticking to that beginner's mindset helped her to get to the bottom of it. And finally, we break out some of the frameworks that she introduces in her book, like the 3 Bs, for example, around breaking in, building equity, and breaking out of a career. So it's a really interesting perspective that Emmy brings to this topic of continuous learning and a beginner's mindset, and building a career that you choose rather than the career that's given to you. Without further ado, please sit back, relax, and enjoy my episode with Emmy Sobieski. Emmy, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Andrew.
This is going to be fun. You and I have known each other for quite a while. We've worked together and supported each other in lots of different things. And today, I'm going to get a chance to learn a little bit about your upbringing and the lessons that you've taken through your career that I think have all played a part, and we sort of touched on this a little bit before we started recording, have all played a part in this book that you've now released, that you've got out there, and the people that you're helping through that book. So I'm excited to dive into that. I want to start right at the beginning. I don't often do this with guests, but I want to start at the beginning and really understand what your childhood was like, what it was like growing up, because I think it's an important framing for, I think, the rest of our conversation as well. So what was it like growing up as Emmy Sobieski?
It's a great question, because from the outside, it was a very privileged. I grew up half a mile from the beach in Santa Monica. Our next door neighbors, our neighbors down the street were Walter Matthau and other, famous directors, writers, producers. We would go up to Ray Stark's ranch. He produced He was like one of the top producers at Columbia Pictures. He produced Funny Girl and about all the Neil Simon films. So, it really does look like this, like incredible. My dad's a lawyer. He's an investor, all that kind of stuff. My parents were kind of like oil and water. And my dad grew up in a very Depression era type of home because they lived through the Depression. And his father had gone to Stanford with one pair of shoes and 10 cents. And so he didn't want to use the shoes. He was on a baseball scholarship, but he didn't want to use the shoes in baseball and use them up. And so he played baseball barefoot for his entire time on his scholarship. And even when I knew him when he was, Grandpa Poe, he would wear his kid shoes, and he was a famous lawyer. There's legal cases that are in textbooks, law textbooks, that reference his cases. And he was commissioner of corporation for the state of California. He would still wear his shoes until they were complete holes in the bottom. And so my dad was the same. He was really obsessed and still is very obsessed with every penny that is spent. And my mom had a different perspective. Her perspective was like, kind of this hippie thing. But she said, well, I don't want my kids growing up spoiled. And so you get one pair of shoes and one pair of pants per year, doesn't matter how much you grow. And then when I got horses, which is, of course, very luxurious, I got a horse. That is one pair of boots every other year, one pair of shoes every other year. And so as I grew, one year I grew 9 inches, and I learned this over time. So in a way, I kind of learned a scarcity mindset because I learned that, like I'm not going to get another pair of pants for a year. So I better buy these pants really big in case I grow because it doesn't matter. And then I walked around in my shoes with my toes curled under. And so, I'd have all this work done on them when I got older. So it's a funny thing because it, from the outside, it looked like this really luxurious thing. But I think the mindset thing was that I was always resilient, and I always took a beginner mindset perspective to all of the craziness of my parents. And so I remember sitting down with my best friend, and I think I had kind of a negative run-in with my father. And I sat down with my best friend, and we were 6 years old, and he had flipped my bed over on top of me, among a number of other things. And I said to my friend, I said, not all parents are going to be above average. And my parents are not good parents. They're good at a lot of things, but they're not good at parenting. And so I believe we're going to need to raise ourselves. And I said this at age 6. And my friend at that time turned out she had a similar situation at home, and she turned out not to be as resilient. But I found other friends along the way that had similar situations, and we partnered together in kind of a community and figured out what we were going to do. So I would figure out, okay, my parents put me in this very fancy school called Westlake School for Girls that's now become Westlake Harvard. 7th grade, there were all these kids coming out of rehab. Carol Burnett's daughter, all this. And I just said to my friend, this is not a good place. If there's so much drugs that kids are coming out of rehab in 7th grade, this is not a place for us. And so she and I found a better school called Thatcher up in Ojai. And we worked cutting hedges and stuff like that to build up enough money to pay for the applications, the testing, and all that. We did all of that, then went to our parents and said, we have gotten into this school. You need to write the checks because if we had gone to our parents and said, can we apply? They would have just said, no, that's too much hassle for us. So we kind of really mapped out everything. And I think that has helped me through my entire life because I was living in a scarcity in such scarcity, but I somehow just said, they don't know what they're talking about.
Right.
And, here's how we're going to do it. And that's always been my mentality.
Yeah. So it's fascinating knowing you like I know you. Like I didn't know anything about this the sort of background, like the fact your mom, you're very humble and you don't talk about this stuff a lot. But I mean, your mom became a very well known screenwriter. You clearly living in a great part of California. Like so, you were around a lot of abundance. Like again, like you said, to the outside, there's a lot of abundance in your life. What you're so open about sharing, which is also fascinating because I relate to this as well, is the actual family dynamic might have been built around scarcity. So now you get this weird like dichotomy, like you said, and then you go into these schools, and I also like my parents put me in the best schools in Cape Town, the best school in Cape Town, and we were like middling, upper middle income, like nothing, we were one of the poorer kids at a very rich school, basically, right? And so you see all these things, and you see kind of how some of these people live that you're looking up to, and you saw the drug thing. It's like, oh, that's not the life I want to have, right? Is that what is that what unlimited abundance looks like? I don't want that. And so this is why I think it's fascinating to sit down and talk to you about what does an abundance mindset actually mean, because you've kind of seen both sides of it. You've seen the good and the bad.
Yeah. Yeah. In my view, it's a choice that we make. And so it starts with a beginner mind, which you have a great beginner mind, right? It starts with like, and the older you get, the harder it is to have a beginner mind because you're not a beginner anymore. So you think, oh, I know it. And our minds they use a ton of calories. And so they're always trying to find the shortcuts of, oh, I've seen that pattern before. Oh, I know people like that. And so it's harder and harder to have a beginner mind. And the way that I try to do that is by staying curious. So the other day I had a friend visiting, and like just we're very close, and yet there was just everything I said she did the opposite. It was like debate and argue and criticize, and I was getting annoyed, and then I just said, okay, I got to step back and be curious. And I realized that there was some financial pressure and some other things going on behind the background that were just creating this dynamic, right? And so it's just taking the moments to step back and go, we don't realize, we think that, see, our thoughts become beliefs, become actions.
Yeah.
But we so automatically fly through our thoughts and think that they're correct without questioning them. And I think the big thing is to start with this lots and lots of curiosity and a total beginner mind every day that you wake up. I think that for me is the first thing. And then the second is, and Byron Katie does a great job with this. She calls it it's basically 4 questions and a turnaround. But it's like a guy, I'm seeing a guy, and I invite him over to dinner at my friend's house, right? And it's just going to be like this casual, fun dinner. But, I get kind of ambitious about what I'm going to cook because I want to impress this guy. And, so it's going to be this steak, and it's going to be, just like cauliflower souffle and red wine reduction sauce. It's going to be amazing. And, my friends are there and whatever. It's like just the two of them, and he's supposed to come, and then me. And he doesn't show up. And the way that Byron Katie, so then you can be hurt or whatever. But the way that Byron Katie says is take the 4 opposites. So he doesn't care about me. He doesn't care about himself. I don't care about him. And I don't care about myself. And if you can hold those 4, if you can find some truth in all of those 4, whichever one was embedded, like probably he doesn't care about me, your brain can't hold 4 opposite truths at the same time. And so the thing that's bugging you, when it's a thought, before it becomes a belief, just out the window. And now you're back to beginner mindset.
Oh, I like that. Yeah, it's like a forced handbrake in this whole thing to say, like, let's go through those 4 questions. And it also reminds me, there's a quote, Tim Ferriss is using it a lot now, and I think he's attributed to a guy called BJ Miller, and it's so simply put, and it's don't believe everything you think.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And that's the thing. Thought becomes belief, becomes
exactly.
action. And so you've got to grab it. And sometimes I find that there's something it's like becoming a belief. It's getting embedded in your brain and you can't get rid of it. And you got to
Hmm.
take that belief and go, what thoughts led to that belief? And then
Yeah.
you can go back in and question it. So it's not like it's too late if it's become a belief or it's become an action.
Yeah.
And you see this a lot with people. I've gotten really into bodybuilding and on a bodybuilding diet. And so my friends will come over and they'll be, and and they see me, whatever, 35%, 35 pounds lighter and a lot of muscle.
Yeah.
And the first, and you don't even have to bring it up. I mean, they just like, they see you and they're like, I hardly recognize you.
Yeah.
And but then all the conversation without me bringing anything up is why they can't diet, why they can't stop eating, why they
Hmm.
can't work out, why that, and it's on and on and on. And these beliefs have become actions or inactions.
Yeah.
And I don't care whether they work out or not. They can do what they want with their life, right?
Right.
But it's this thing where they see someone and then they start going, look, I can't do it, I can't do it, I can't do
Yeah.
it. And it's like either just do it or don't do it. But
Yeah.
so that's where you can back these things up and say, is that, and Byron Katie just has some great like downloadable resources,
Yeah.
is that true? Who would I be if that wasn't true? So
Yeah.
it's using this beginner mind to say, do I want to have these thoughts about the world or about my spouse or about my
Hmm.
work or about how I look? Do I want these thoughts? Are they serving me before they become beliefs? Do I want these beliefs? Do I want new ones?
Yeah, so this is great. Thank you for like kind of laying the foundation here and actually and presenting a couple tools there around beginner's mindset and those 4 questions to tackle. And I think I want to bring this back to then the limiting belief of scarcity mindset, right? The opposite of abundance. And you see it play out. I see it play out a lot in lots of aspects of my life. Like one around, we've both been in the sort of content creation game, and so there's like there's a trap that you can fall into of zero sum thinking there, where it's like, well, so and so is getting all these likes and impressions, like I'm not, and so there's a scarcity thing there. But that's also like, I don't think that's true either. Like if you really think about it, that there's benefit to everyone, sharing in that, and the pie is actually a lot bigger than you think. And of course, that can play out in growing a business and just comparing yourself to others. Um, let's talk about that aspect of it. Another one I want to bookmark and come back to is sort of the idea of scarcity and abundance related to money, and the idea of how money is something that actually flows, and that when money's in motion, it's and I think this resonates a lot with your thinking around $100 million careers. So we'll come back to that idea of money in motion and all that, but just in terms of like the zero sum game thinking and the fact that so the scarcity thinking that limits people there, like what are your thoughts on that? So have you also seen that? Like how have you approached that?
So the first thing I would ask, and I ask this of myself, and I think it's a tough question, is if you have a negative thought about something,
Mm,
how does that serve you? So my friends that aren't dieting and their negative thought about like, I don't like to diet, I don't have an off button, I never lose weight, but it's serving them because each day they get to eat whatever they want,
yeah.
right? So that's a tough thing. It's like, how does it serve you to say,
Mm,
you know, what, I might as well not even try on this social media stuff because I'm just
mm,
never going to have viral content.
mm,
A different perspective is there are a lot of people that are making 7 figures that have less than 5,000 followers on LinkedIn,
mm,
because the people that interact with them, they have such real content that they have a far higher percentage of customers that are interacting with them.
mm,
My most viral post is this picture post on LinkedIn. I think one time it got like 2 million views. A different time it got like 1.5 million views.
mm,
And it basically says, that people shouldn't have to be hired based on experience.
mm,
And so all of my, I mean, people want to hear that, right? I
Yeah.
shouldn't have to work. I should just be entitled. I should just get a job,
Mm,
right? And not have to have
mm-hmm.
any experience. And, but literally 95% of the connections that I got from that post are a bunch of people that have never worked, that are entitled, that want free
Yeah.
stuff. So none
Yeah.
of them are going to be my clients, right? And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
anything, but this is just an example. It's like
Right.
anything that you look at, and I will say anything you look at from a scarcity mindset is like, why is that mindset serving you?
Mm.
And what other, and then because there is a way that it is serving you.
Yeah.
And so, and then do you want to continue with that or not? Right. And how, what could you replace it with? Because, your brain is going to be like, no, 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 that's been serving me.
Mm.
I have another friend who is just a perennial pessimist,
Mm.
and she believes that it has led to all of her success.
Hmm.
And so, she has made more than $100 million on a scarcity mindset. So
Mm.
it's absolutely, they're not two opposite things. It's
Or like,
more,
or bad and good and bad things.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. It's
Yeah.
just, and so that's why it's so good to ask the question, like, how is this serving me?
Mm.
Because you may come up with the answer, you know what? This is really in alignment with my personality. It's where I'm
Mm.
comfortable. I don't want to move,
Mm.
like, and I'm still going to have lots of growth and lots of pleasure in my life, starting with a scarcity mindset. Like, it's not that one's better than the other.
Mm.
There's a lot of
Yeah.
times that I've been too optimistic, especially
Mm.
with some of my private investments. And it's
Mm.
just lucky that I have 30 years experience as an investor, and as someone that has analyzed businesses, that I can go in there and rescue those companies, or,
Mm. Mm.
really get after them and get them to right the ship.
Mm.
So, and other times they're doing swimmingly well, but,
Mm. Mm.
that's, so sometimes my optimism, the optimist in me will just go flying off the cliff with optimism. And
Mm.
the good thing about me is I have a lot of resilience and I recover really well,
Yeah.
right? But
Yeah.
optimists will do that, and a pessimist will never get close to the cliff,
Right.
right? Or
Exactly.
or a scarcity mindset, you won't get close to the cliff, but you might miss a lot of the huge opportunities.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I don't even think one is bad or good. I just, but the big question to ask is, how is this serving me?
Yeah. Well, yeah, and that's such a good example, I think, of that beginner's mindset, or kind of the first principles. It's about getting down to that intrinsic motivation, and then making that non-judgmental um, sort of analysis of it, and saying, well, okay, maybe this actually is working, and it's aligned to my values and everything, like you said.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
like
That.
if you think about America coming out of the Depression, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
coming out of the Depression, we had World War II, and then after that, we had this huge economic expansion. And of course, economists say, all of that happened because of all the investment and the baby boom that happened when the soldiers came home and everything.
Mm-hmm.
But I would also question whether a lot of the success of the American economy also came because we were post-depression and we had these depression era babies. And so everyone was working very hard, and they were very concerned about, obviously, not having drawdowns on their wealth, right? So the people were compounding in a very careful way. And that scarcity mindset combined with this baby boomer may have led to an even better economy. So,
Mm-hmm.
there are ways that you can think of, like, because wasteful spending could be the opposite of a scarcity mindset.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And yeah, particularly relevant right now as well. Like, you look at the companies that are turning around, like Meta announced their quarterly results, and they were phenomenal, right? Like, and their whole thing has been on efficiency, and probably that more of that, like, conservative view. So this is already just a really interesting idea, that this spectrum of scarcity and abundance is not necessarily a spectrum of good and bad, that both ends of that can have benefits and negatives. Let's shift to the abundance side a little bit and talk about how risk and appetite for risk plays into that. This idea of that I've been interested in over the last few years is kind of the Stephen Wilkinson talks about this a lot as well. Like the idea of money as this, money is this kind of fluid thing, and it gets its power and its energy from moving. And so you don't want to, you don't want to sit and hoard money. You want to keep moving it along, right? And whether that's philanthropically sharing it, but also taking risks and taking bets. You've spent a lot of time on Wall Street. You've worked with some insane, portfolio managers. You've managed insane portfolios yourself. What is the relationship you've seen between this idea of, abundance and money flowing and risk taking?
I think the biggest mistake people do, first of all, everybody can get lucky, right? A clock is right twice an hour, or twice a day.
Right.
So there are plenty of people I know who have made tens of millions, 50 million, 60 million, completely on luck and no brains and no hard work. So, you do see that on Wall Street. But what happens is that a lot of people read these shorter investment, courses, or they think, okay, I'm young, and I get plenty of mentees that have come to me in the past or whatever. I'm young, I can take risk, because I've got my whole life ahead of me to recover from the risk. Well, why do we need to recover from something, right?
Right.
So the thing that I think about risk is you definitely need to take it. But number one, the more risk you take, the more research you have to do. And number two, that the risk, you need to look at it on a portfolio basis. So my smartest friends that are more, I would say, less growth minded as well, what they do is they basically say 5% of the portfolio I take risk.
Yeah.
But even at a 5%, I would argue you've got to do a lot more research. And so some people ask, I ran the number one fund in the world in 1999, and it was up 490, I think it was like 493% in 12 months. And it was up 620% from inception in the first 12 months of its life. And so, a lot of people ask me, well, how did they do it? How do they do it? Right. And the first thing is my index, which I was a tech fund, and my index, which was the Hamburg Quist, tech index, was up 150% in that same time period. Right. So I had 150. So I had a really nice kind of tailwind.
Right.
But 150 versus 493 is still a big delta. Right.
Yeah.
And so I worked 20 hours a day. And I tracked everything, and so I had a couple of things. One was that my limitation was I had to own 100 stocks. So it had to be distributed. And I looked at it, and my boss had said, I want this fund to be number one. I think like a month in, we were top 10% in the world. And she was like, this is unacceptable. And we had it set up that there were people from all over the firm picking their favorite tech stocks and putting it in the pot. And I said, well, if top 10% is unacceptable, there's no way we could be number one with consensus. And she said, fine, you run it. And that was how I ended up running the number one fund in the world. And so I realized that the real ones that are going to win in this like big up market are going to be ones that own 6 stocks and they bet on the right 6 stocks, right? Not the ones that own 100 stocks, because you diversify away your returns. So I then found, okay, I want to be in semiconductors in Japan, or I want to be in internet in Japan, or I want to be in US internet, whatever I wanted to be in. And then I would find the highest correlated stocks. And then, so I would own 100 of them, but the portfolio would act like 6 stocks. So in that environment, when you're running $500 million every day, everything counts. And so all I did was research. I just read and read and read. And then my partner, he did most of the trading. And so between the two of us, you just work nonstop. And so I have people come to me and go, oh, I'd love it if you could 6x my money. And like, I don't even want to put the work in to try to 6x my money anymore.
Been there,
So
done that.
it's one of those things like there. And when I see people say, I want to take risk, it's more because they want to be braver so that they can get higher returns.
Right.
And anytime you take risk, you got to like do so much more research than if you're not taking risk.
Yeah. Yeah. And make sure that you're avoiding long tail risk and sort of that catastrophic, like take you out of the game risk as well. I feel like
but the long tails are also the ones that are going to make you the most money. I mean, this is the thing about like all the money advice out there. And I've written about this too. It's like, Warren Buffett, go to any of his big meetings, which I've gone to in Omaha, and people say, what is your investment advice? And he says, oh, you should invest in the S&P index, right? No one is going to make $100 million because you can go on my website. I've got $100 million calculator to tell you how long, like what return you'd have to get for how long and what you put in to make 100 million. No one's going to make 100 million investing $10,000 at 8% a year. They're going to be dead before it happens.
Yeah.
And you look at Warren Buffett and you say, well, why is he making that advice? Because like this long tail thing, everyone's worried, okay, that's going to take me out of the game. I'm going to end up with zero. But all of those guys, George Soros had the British pound. Warren Buffett had Geico. So all of these guys that tell everyone else to invest in the S&P, at 8% a year or whatever, they all had one huge bet. Right? I mean, George Soros went against the Bank of England to bet that the British pound would collapse, and he made billions, right? Off of that. Now, after you have billions, sure, you can like go compound off the S&P.
Yeah.
And and Warren Buffett had a couple of huge wins, and one of them was buying Geico at the right price at the right time. Well, after you do that, and it quadruples. So there's like a point in time that you want that tail, you want that positive tail risk. You just have to have done enough research. You've got like what Warren Buffett talks about, having a huge moat, making sure the chances that you're wrong are very low.
Yeah. And so this idea of swinging for the fences and like there's always some massive stepwise increase in wealth that all of these people, Bezos, everyone that's sort of in that echelon now has had. And then you said, then they're just living off the compounding from there on. I'm curious, like what your take in the, like what kind of a mindset is required there? Like, are you fully betting the house? You say you're doing your research, but like at some point there has to be some, you want to get this as small as possible, obviously, but there is some risk that it all leaves, that it's all gone at the end of the day, right? Is that like how are people living with that?
Well, I mean, different people, right? I mean, either if you have a growth mindset or our old stockbroker, Don Kroll, he was a fraternity brother at Stanford with my dad. And he used to say that my dad is a risk seeker. So my dad would buy stuff because there's a piece of it. Like if you pick that tail, like because it becomes gambling, right? If you bet on the real long shot and you're right and everyone else is wrong, how smart does that make you look? I mean, that makes you, then everyone wants to know how you did it.
Right.
And, you're not going to say luck. My best stock, the best stock I ever bought was a company called theglobe.com.
Okay.
And I've also tweeted about this. And it tried to come public twice. It was run by two 19-year-olds. Their servers kept going down. Like they had no systems. They barely had like any idea what their finances were. I mean, it was just a complete, but then the market started heating up around like October, November of 1998.
Yeah.
And people were like, we want anything that's the internet. And they came again. Bear Stearns was their banker, and they decided, okay, we're going to try to go do an IPO again and see if there's enough demand. Well, all the other portfolio managers at Nicholas Applegate were like, no, thank you.
Yeah.
We don't want anything to do with that
Right.
stock. It's a piece of junk.
Right.
And my partner said, no, this thing, there are so many hedge funds that are shorting it, which you have to buy shares to borrow them, to sell them, to short. And he just said, this thing is going to be hot. There's going to be a lot of demand. It's going to really surprise people. And I said, great, let's go all in. And our rule was we had to go in, kind of as we had to go in proportion to the size of our fund. So there are other funds at Nicholas Applegate that were much bigger, but because none of them wanted to go in, then we could buy up to 2% of our fund in the IPO on that day. So we buy it, and so 2% of our fund, so it's at 2%. We buy it, and intraday, it was up 10x. So it went from 2% of our fund to 20% of our fund, and our fund return in that day was higher than 20%. And then when you and that was only a month and a half into launching our fund. So that drove the 630% first 12 months return.
Yeah.
We were out by the end of the day. So we only owned the stock for 6 hours. But then we could compound off of that,
Right.
6 hour, 20%. I mean, basically 10x return. And the guy has written about it. It was funny because when I tweeted about it, the founder tweeted, he replied, and he said, "You're welcome," with a kiss thing.
That's hilarious.
And the company went under in a matter of years. And it was that was the top tick in the price, was 6 hours after the IPO.
Yeah.
But those are those things where it's like, well, were we just lucky? Because my partner, he read the market, and we got in and we got out and we did it right. So were we just lucky, or were we not? Or, so it's a tough thing. I think when people just don't do the research and they take risk for the sake of taking risk or for looking smart, that's when you really get into trouble.
Yeah. Yeah. And where you only rely on luck, because there was obviously some elements of luck, but there was a lot of thinking and research that went into it. And then the thing is, you took the bet. You went and took the risk. You put a big chunk of the fund on the line, and that's the differentiator ultimately, right? Like that's what there were people that didn't do that, and you did, and it came off.
And I had to do it the whole time. I mean, that's the other thing. That's the only way I got to that 495% was what I ended up doing that worked out really well was the top 2 holdings. So I would pick 2 sectors that would be my top 2 holdings for that quarter, say semiconductors in the US and Japan internet or something like that. And then I would buy all those stocks that were highly correlated, that represented those 2 things, those 2 theses. And we got really lucky, or I did enough research, or whichever way you want to look at it, that the top 2 performing sectors each quarter were the top 2 that I had selected. And that happened 4 quarters in a row. So for 4 quarters in a row, we were the number 1 fund. And then also for the year, we were the number 1 fund.
Yeah.
But it was very much, but that's a huge amount of risk, because then that's taking basically 400 million and putting it on like 3 chips effectively, even though it was in 100 stocks.
Right. Yeah. Because there's a high correlation in those stocks. Yeah. So I think another interesting thing here is that the risk taking, the risk that you took was unique to you. Like it was your research, your idea, your thesis, you believed in it. So there was alignment to whatever you were thinking, feeling, your values at the time. And that feels like an important part of this as well, that there is, you know what I mean? Like there was like your whole body was behind that, your whole being.
Yeah. And again, this takes us right back to the beginning about like, what is a beginner mindset, right? Our minds always want to take that shortcut to do a little less work because we're using up 25% of our calories get used by our brains. So our brains are always looking for, the VCs call it pattern recognition, but it's
Yeah.
really like, what's the shortcut so that
Yeah.
I can, do less. And so that what I find is like a lot of people, we would go to investment conferences with other institutional investors, and there's a whole group of hedge fund people that kind of sit around and, well, what are you buying? What are you buying? Right. So they want to know, what is the person buying that has a 495, but then they're basically going to do less research. And then somebody asks them what they bought, and they only bought it because I bought it.
Yeah.
And five down,
Even less. Yeah.
and
No
people are
research.
just taking blind risk, and they
Yeah.
have no idea. And this is why all kinds of financial collapses happen.
Yeah.
And so it's going back and making sure, not only is this risk aligned with your personality, but have you personally done the research? Have you taken a beginner mind and just asked yourself? There was a great company, and actually, there's a perfect example of this. My hedge fund boss had, you have a community of other rich people, been investing for a long time in software and that kind of thing. You've invested on the private side. So he had invested in his company, BMC Software. It did really, really well. It grew into this big company. He made a lot of money on it. And then some of those founders went on to form another company called Peregrine Software. And so he invested in it. And like the CFO, he coached the CFO's kid in the softball league locally. And I mean, like he knew everybody there, and, and he's friends with the board members. And one of the board members was the founder of BMC, right? Just like everybody, they all knew everybody. And this was my stock. And they just they grew at about 20% a year, and they had just, some kind of simple enterprise software that was needed. And they come through New York, and they say, well, we've seen all these fancy internet companies with these big valuations, and we just want you to know that we have that same technology within our company. And so we're going to start breaking out those revenues. And this was June of 2000. And I said, I actually think this internet thing has already rolled over. And I think it'd just be really good if you guys just like keep doing your knitting and stay away from that area. And they said, well, we're not, I said, you don't need to associate yourself with that whole space. And they said, no, we're not asking your opinion. We're just coming through New York to tell you what we're going to do. I said, fine. So we get to the fall of 2000, and they start reporting all these numbers. This is back to the beginner mindset, right? I'm at this huge hedge fund. We have all the people, we know everyone. We've got a huge holding in this stock. Like, I could just sit back and say, yep, we've, for sure we trust them. But I was like, okay, now they're reporting this internet revenue and they're reporting their regular revenue. So I wonder who is buying this product. So I call up Gartner, because we have subscriptions to everything. I call up Gartner, and they have never seen the product or seen anyone buy it. And I thought, well, that's all right. I mean, this is very like cutting edge. Gartner's a little bit old fogies. So maybe I'll find like this super cutting edge. So I found like a super cutting edge company that, that advises people on what tech to buy and everything like that. And I talked to them, and they said they had never seen the software, and they'd never seen a customer. And this is like, they're super cutting edge. They're in Silicon Valley. Like this, if anyone was going to see it, it would have been this consultancy. So now I'm like, okay, now we have a problem. And so I called my boss, and I'm like, I'm so stressed out. And he's like, oh my God, just mellow out. I've known these people forever. I've known them since BMC, blah, blah, blah. Everything's fine. And I'm like, so I just keep calling him. I'm like, I'm still nervous. Because my beginner mind is just like, price times quantity equals revenue, and I don't have any quantity, right? Like that's it. Like people think being at a hedge fund is like this really like hard thing. Like that was for me. I was like, P times Q equals R, and I can't find any Q.
Right.
And so so finally my boss is like, oh, Jesus Christ, you're not going to leave me alone. He's like, fine, we'll go just set up a meeting, fly out here. We'll go visit with them and see how things are going. Right.
Yeah.
And so we go out there, and they're like, and they're like, and the CFO is usually like, he's tan, he's fit, he lives in San Diego, he's high energy. And we go in this meeting and he's like, "Ugh, I just got back from Europe. I'm so exhausted." And I'm like, oh my God, he's signaling he missed the quarter by a mile. Like, this is not good. And I tell my boss, and he's like, yeah, but the stock was like 22 and now it's 20, and I'd rather sell it at 22. And plus we don't really want to take all these taxable gains at the end of the year. It's December. Let's just do it in January. And, so then January comes and it just kind of, the stock was lower. He didn't want to do it. And then they reported, earnings.
Yeah.
That they basically announced that they had been making up the revenues for 8 quarters.
Wow.
The CFO went to jail. The CEO went to jail. The auditor had to quit. The new auditor started, and the next level down of people had been so trained by those executives, they kept sending them false books, and the next auditor quit. It was just, and the thing went to zero.
Rotten to the core.
But it is one of those things, right? That I didn't have to be some sophisticated, and people at home can do this, right? It's just like, it's not sophistication. So that's where I think like the whole money and risk thing goes back to, don't start thinking because you're making big bets with big money or you're taking big risk that you can take shortcuts and think, oh, this other person's smarter than me, I'm going to do what they're doing. Step back, take a breath, and just first principles, beginner mindset, ask yourself those basic questions.
What a great story, first of all. And secondly, I'm reflecting on that now I feel like you've laid out tools to develop an abundance mindset, because in the association I have of it, but it's that idea of you can make big bets, make big returns, get that stepwise, up in your career or your business or your whatever. And to do that, you're just saying it's not that complicated, but it's a shitload of hard work. Like, you've got to do the research, you got to put the work in, and it's first principles. It's beginner's mindset.
Yeah. And picking the mindset that works for you. Going back to that question, like, how do my current actions serve me?
Yeah.
Not just looking at, oh, this person, I'm more scarcity minded or I'm more conservative in my investments. Well, then you're not going to have a down 50% year. So you can compound and catch up with that other person later, right? Or if you have that and you wish you were a risk taker, then take 5% of your portfolio and take a risk that is very well researched. That's the piece that people miss a lot of times, right?
Yeah.
So it's it's funny because, like, for me, the biggest thing is whatever you're doing with money or with your life or with your mindset in alignment with your values and your principles. And is it in your personality? Because if it isn't, it's not gonna hold. And even when I'm coaching clients, and my coaching is $100 million career coaching, 25,000 families in the U.S. are worth more than 100 million. And I believe that doesn't need to just be people in Silicon Valley and New York. It just needs to be the people that know the path and are willing to do the work. And when I coach these clients, they're really excited to like get a plan and figure out if they should, how they can add private equity or get in what I call the money flywheel, which is to work as a scout or a part-time partner at a venture capital or private equity firm, and then be on the board of directors of some private or public companies, and then also be scaling a private company. And you can do all three at the same time. And then each one gives you new opportunities into your next venture. And so that's really like the big way to make money with your biggest investment, which is your time, not with your own money. And when I start that coaching, we start it with values, first principles, priorities. And the question every time is, why aren't we talking about which company, the tactics? Why aren't we talking about what private equity company I should target? It's like, because we've got to have the right foundation to do that. Because I've got to know what kind of person you are and what will really, so that you won't just go on that path for 2 years and give up.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to end this off by talking a little bit more about the book, because I think that is the culmination of all this experience and everything that you spent a lot of time, and you've really, ever since I've known you, kind of been working towards putting this book out, and it's amazing to see it out there now. So the money flywheel sounds like one example of this, and I definitely going to dig more into that part of the book. But what other part of the framework and the ideas you shared have surprised people the most?
Well, the thing that surprised me the most was I used, when I finally was able to articulate how to make money in your career like a runaway unicorn investment.
Mm-hmm.
And I call it the 3 Bs: break in, build equity, and break out.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody like a Bill Gurley literally broke into Wall Street, moved over from being a computer analyst to, Deutsche Bank wanted to recruit him away from First Boston, and he used that as an opportunity to leave as a computer analyst and become an internet analyst. He took Amazon public with Deutsche Bank and then became the platform guy at Benchmark. And that's where he invested in Uber, and he's worth $7 billion. So you don't actually need to even go to phase 3, the breakout phase. But the breakout phase is Elon Musk, Bill Gates. It is founders that take it all the way, right? And that's where you can make hundreds of billions of dollars. But my book, called The $100 Million Career, that it's really that you can take that framework, the 3 Bs framework, and apply it to many more industries that I'm even aware of. And then the question that I help with in coaching is, okay, but Emmy, when's the right time? Because if you look at look at Mark Andreessen versus Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel founded PayPal, billionaire, super successful. Mark Andreessen Horowitz. But Peter Thiel will tell you, so he came out of college and he then went to Stanford Law School and Stanford MBA. And then he went and worked in a law firm for a couple of years, and then worked as an investment banker, and then founded PayPal. Mark Andreessen founded his company straight out of his college.
Right.
And 2.5 years after he graduated college, he had IPO'd his company, and it was already worth tens of millions of dollars, sold it to AOL. And so Peter Thiel now pays for students, the Thiel Fellowship, to quit college and start working. And so that's really the thing that I help people with, is like, when is the right time in your specific career to move from breaking in to building equity? And then others that are building equity reach out and say, should I keep building equity like a Bill Gurley and be worth $7 billion possibly? Or in my case, is it better to move to breaking out and building my own thing? And, again, it's about the situation and the personality. But that's been one of the biggest messages from the book.
Yeah.
And the other message that I think goes back to this mindset that I've written about in my blog is, you've got to moonshot your career. And here's why. You've got to shoot for 100 million or more, 200 million, whatever feels crazy. Because the worst thing that can happen is we like, on the short term, we all overestimate what we can do, but in the long term, we underestimate it.
Yeah.
And so if you don't have a moonshot goal, then you hit your goal and then you get depressed, unmotivated. I knew this one woman, it was crazy. I met with her the week after she won her second set of team and individual gold medals at her second Olympics. And the Germans had always won before, and she was from Holland. And she never thought she could win one, but that was her big goal. And so when she won the second one and her horse was retiring, you would think she would be like, and she was sitting in a dark room, completely depressed, 1 month after winning her second set of team and individual Olympic golds, because she didn't have anything. Like, she hadn't dreamt big enough. So
Yeah.
and later she won a third Olympic gold and a bunch more records with a new horse, but it takes so much energy to get back out of that. So what I recommend, but then people will say, well, Emmy, then you're always missing your goals. You're always feeling like you're not doing well enough. What I recommend is to have moonshot goals and realistic milestones.
Yeah.
And you can move those milestones up and down. You celebrate each of the milestones, but those goals. And so that's where I say, you've got to have these $100 million career goals. If money is something that's important to you, which is
Yeah.
not, other people
For
want
everyone.
balance and happiness, and that's great. Beginning of my book, I say, if you want balance and happiness, put the book down. This is not the book for you.
Yeah. And so this reminds me of a conversation you and I had with Robbie over dinner, and you brought this fantastic bottle of wine. We were sitting there in San Diego, and we were chatting, and we were having this conversation. I remember saying to you, like, no, like I want to grow a business that makes 2 to 5 million a year, and I will be very happy. I can spend time with my family and all that sort of thing. And I know that was not the sort of thinking that you have. It's not the thinking that Robbie has either. And I'm glad you brought the work-life balance thing into it, because I'm sitting here now reflecting on that conversation and what you just said, and thinking that it's the 2 to 5 million thing is it's a milestone. That's the milestone for me. And having $100 million business, it absolutely can still be a goal that I want. And I could, because there's a value in the drive and the momentum that gives you to keep going. And if you also have the work-life balance thing in there, you might be okay at a 5 million milestone or a 7 or a 10 or whatever, and you might just say, I'm good, and maybe there the decision point becomes, actually, I'm going to sell this business, or I'm going to have someone run it for me or whatever. And so you've got that flexibility built in, but I'm seeing the value of that, like, BHAG, right? The big, hairy, audacious goal. So yeah, it's super interesting to break this down even further now, given the conversation we had about a year ago.
Yeah, interesting. And it is about picking what fits with your personality.
Exactly.
But I
Exactly.
still do the milestones fit? Like if
Exactly.
you're someone that enjoys the finer things in life, that wants growth and expansion, and you have a business, you want to make money in the business, then to me it makes perfect sense to have $100 million or more goal, and at least reflect on what would it take to get there? What are the things that I need to do? Do I need to take on advisor roles? Do I, how do I start my own money flywheel between,
Yeah.
Deal making, service providing, as well as, leading? Like how do I get involved, investing in some of these, things that you see. So how do you get yourself where you've got multiple streams, not only of income, but of investment, and multiple things that could really take off. Some of the quote unquote easier ones that I've seen in terms of making 100 million, like if you look at Mark Andreessen, he had multiple exits. You look at Elon Musk, he had multiple exits, right? So you put a 10 million exit and a 30 million, and you start compounding both of them. It's much easier than starting with 8 million and then that's your only win. So, so it's really putting a lot of chips on the table, doing the research, and then, as you say, deciding on the kind of balance that you want.
Yeah.
But people are like, even there's a great book called Ultra Learning.
Yeah.
I think I've talked to you about it before.
Yeah.
And the thing that I find so crazy, like, because I've done a bunch of different sports, and I just pick up new things and learn them, right? And part of it is that beginner mind. But part of it is that once you learn how to learn, the second time is so much easier. The third time is so much, it doesn't matter if you're learning a new language, you're learning math, you're learning coding, which I did at age 50. It's every time you learn something new, it's actually easier, and people overestimate how hard that next thing is going to be. And so you may be, this may be part of something to reflect on. You may be overestimating There just may be some things you can do in your business to change the way that you're doing it, or that you may be overestimating how much more work it would take to get
Yeah.
all the way to that next milestone.
I think that's entirely possible. Yeah, I really do. I really do. And I'm also very aware of how helpful others can be as mentors, as coaches, as guides in being able to point that out. Because a lot of these things are often blind spots, that you don't even see. And you're just like, well, one path and I'm just going to tread that path harder to get there. But maybe there's a totally different path that you haven't even seen yet. And I think that's what your book is essentially about, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of paths, and it
Right.
just needs to match with your personality.
Right. Right. Well, my friend, this has been a fun conversation. It's always great catching up with you, and it was really great to get into a meaty topic like this. So thank you for spending this time with me. And I want to give you an opportunity to kind of give a last word to the audience, to people listening. I think thinking through how to bring about more abundance in their life and to find that alignment. And we're going to put all the links to your websites and your socials and that in the show notes. Everyone listening, check that out. But over to you, Emmy, for last words.
So just know again that we overestimate ourselves in the short run and we underestimate ourselves in the long run. So moonshot all of your goals. Don't be afraid to moonshot your goals, and find a coach that's going to put that belief capital in you. And that's really, if you feel like you need a coach. But just my main message is that, no matter how big your goals are, make them bigger, and then have milestones you can celebrate on the way.
Beautiful stuff. Thanks, Emmy.
Thanks for having me.
Hello. I hope you enjoyed that episode. It's Andrew again with a quick message. If you'd like to support the show, the best way to do that is to leave us ratings and reviews where you listened. If you're on YouTube, hit the like and subscribe buttons, and feel free to leave a comment. We love hearing from our listeners and viewers. If you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, please take the time to give us a rating and leave a review. Once again, we love hearing from our loyal listeners. If you're listening to this on Spotify, please hit the follow button to make sure that you don't miss new episodes as they come out. See you next week for another episode of the Learning Culture Podcast. Thank you for listening.